Riot Games did say that they were going to be taking a break for this patch, but that doesn't mean that they aren't making any changes, they're just making less than normal. Because they aren't changing as much, or in some cases just making the wrong changes, a lot of things from last patch are still very strong. However, there's some new things that have been discovered that we need to go over, so I'm going to be giving you broken strategies for the upcoming patch today. To find guides that get to go way more in depth than the stuff that I can give you guys here on YouTube, you should definitely go check out our website. And if you're interested in more content, then by all means, subscribe so you don't miss any videos from the channel. And if you do learn something today, please hit the like button and comment what it was, or comment what you think about the strategies that I'm giving you in this video. That way I know you guys are actually getting something from it. The first thing I'm covering today is something that's probably on everybody's mind, as it was definitely out of nowhere and really shocked a lot of people. Sona and Lux as a combo bot lane became incredibly broken. So broken that it actually prompted them to get nerfed on this patch. But here's why the nerfs don't matter. These nerfs are targeted at the scalings of the champion as they go throughout the laning phase and even into the later stages of the game. And that isn't where they have problems. Lux and Sona will be having problems in the early game, where they're able to be abused because they don't do as much damage, they don't have as low cooldowns, they don't have the ability power they need to actually make poke, stick, and hurt. What allows them to get through the early game and the early laning phases without much problems is the runes that they abuse to do so, as both of them take guardian setups, with Shield Bash and Revitalize for increased healing and shielding, and the small amount of resistances that Shield Bash gives does a lot of work when you're playing champions who are already extremely squishy. The whole setup is to get them through the early game, because once they make it past that early stage and they really start to ramp up in power, they become unstoppable, and it's incredibly difficult to punish them. Really, this nerf just hurts the Lux and Sona players who don't abuse the combo of Sona Lux bottom. This whole new strategy does bring about a really cool, unique idea though. Even if in the future, these champions do get nerfed or the runes do get nerfed to the point where they no longer work together as oppressively as they do right now, this shows that hyper-defensive bot lanes that focus on scaling are possible. And there could be more innovation as we move forward that you need to be looking out for. All of a sudden, mage bot laners became a thing, fasting Senna became a thing, running double support bottom with support items was a thing, and then running support items in other lanes was a thing, and all of these focused on scaling and being a defensive pick. Lux plus Sona bot lane is the newest step in that direction, but what comes next? Let me know if you guys have any interesting thoughts about bot lane combos that could work in the future. And to give you an idea that I thought about, I was thinking that potentially Pantheon plus Pyke bottom lane could be the extreme opposite of what Sona and Lux are trying to be. They would also be a natural counter to these champions in terms of both how they scale and how they look to survive the early game. While we're talking about the bot lane, I want to reiterate to you guys another strategy that we went over a little while ago that people seem to forgot about, but recently was creeping back in. And it's always been there. I don't know why people aren't abusing it yet, but there is a very important reason as to why Caitlyn is overpowered and why she is still going to be overpowered even after Riot takes away the 5 movement speed they gave her on last patch. Using cut down on AD carries who have high range and therefore have low base health and also taking Cole is incredibly important. Let me ask you right now, what is Caitlyn's goal in the early lane? She really only has one, and it's to abuse her oppressive CC and zoning power of her traps alongside her excellent range. She really has a lot of power in her level 1 because at that point, most champions don't have the ability to contest her at all. So when you take your level 1, 2, 3, and maybe even level 4 and add on an extra 5% damage, it makes a huge difference. And let's not pretend like that's the only point in the game where the rune is actually useful. It scales incredibly well, and it also has some uses against niche builds, like say Frozen Mallet, Black Cleaver, Senna. It can make you really effective against that sort of thing. And while I'm talking about other champions, let me not confuse you. It's not just for Caitlyn to abuse, this can also be done by other AD carries, and Senna is also a good example. She has healing and can definitely afford to take something like a Cole in the early game, and considering that she has almost as low base health as Caitlyn, she can also abuse cutdown when she isn't going for the Black Cleaver Frozen Mallet build. Learning which matchups you can abuse cutdown in and which matchups you can abuse Cole in is really important to the bot lane meta right now when you're playing traditional AD carries, and Caitlyn is the one who sticks out like a sore thumb. She sticks out almost as much as you will if you go check out our website when you start playing your ranked games. Forget better jungle wins, it's really just a GameLeap diff. At this point, I want you to try and think about what the past things we've talked about have in common. And one thing should definitely be really noticeable. But if you haven't already, the other champions that I've talked about so far and the other people in the roles that I've talked about so far are abusing their massive ranges. Right now, the backline is more separated from the rest of the team than they've ever been before, and you could just look at any website and see this trend happening. If you look at support, most of the short range or even straight up melee supports are on the lower end of the spectrum. Same thing for the bot laners. When you get to mid lane, there's a little exception there because assassins exist and they are not really short range, even though you might think they are. And then you look at jungle and you look at top lane and the pattern becomes clear. A lot of champions who are strong right now are ones who have the ability to hard engage or really close distances super hard. You're looking at stuff like a Shen diving in, a Maokai ulting in and using his W, a Singed being able to ground people and not allow them to move around and kite, Yorick cutting people off with walls, Malphite engaging with his ultimate, Zac diving in with his slingshot, Hecarim outspeeding everybody and diving in with his ultimate and his E and maybe his ghost that he might have, Vi being literally unstoppable as she dashes to whoever she wants, Nunu rolling an avalanche into whoever happens to get in his way. If I were to keep going, we would be here for a while, and I'm not trying to waste your time. You get the idea. Right now, having the ability to hard engage is really important, and you want to avoid champions who are short range and have soft engage. The full tank stone plate builders of the past are really struggling right now. Stuff like Trundle, Sejuani, Jarvan, and others are struggling because they don't really do as much. I can give you a direct example right now. Let's compare Jarvan and Zac. Jarvan's EQ range is way less than Zac's E range, and he would definitely have to be within range of, let's say, the Lux Sona bot lane that we talked about before. And in this case, all it takes is one binding to be thrown out at the Jarvan when he starts to go in, and he stops in his tracks. Even if he does manage to get on top of them, he's probably going over a large amount of distance and might not have any follow-up from his team. So they just kind of shrug him off and he doesn't actually do anything through their shielding and their CC. Zac, on the other hand, his range is huge and he can dive on top of people without being stopped. The only exception would be knockback and knocking aside effects. Lux plus Sona is way more afraid of a Zac than they are of a Jarvan every single time, because he is always a threat that they can't actually deal with. It's just not available to them in the kit that they have, with the tools that they have at their disposal. All of this does not mean that you can't play champions who are short range and have soft engage. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that you need to be careful and avoid them because there are a lot of situations where they're really, really bad, and you might actually be unintentionally handicapping yourself. The next strategy I'm going to give you guys is in the top lane, and I'm going to use an example with a specific champion, Hecarim, but there are other champions who can do what Hecarim does. You're looking for top lane champions who can remain safe, even in tower dives, have really good sustain, and even though it's not necessary, bonus points if they happen to have a bunch of mobility. Hecarim just so happens to be the prime-time example right now. It just so happens that before his buff, he was in a fantastic spot. And because Riot didn't really seem to know what they were doing, they buffed him anyways, and gave him a really, really good spot in the top lane meta because of it. Right now, one of the most important things that you can have as a top laner is the ability to survive tower dives. And this could be because you're always sustaining to full health, it could be because you have the ability to avoid attacks or damage entirely, like a Jaxi or a Fiora W, there's a lot of things. And Hecarim gives you examples of all of these wrapped into one. Let me break it down for you. Hecarim has his W, which makes him heal in trades and against minions. It has a cap, but that's not too big of a deal because the cap is large. And if Hecarim wants to, he can raise the abilities ranks as he levels up in order to up the cap even more. He's also a really fantastic user of Conqueror because he has a really low cooldown Q. So now you've got two things going for you in the healing department. Unless you already somehow have grievous wounds really early on in the game, you're not going to be able to beat Hecarim out because he has that good sustain. Now let's say you're facing the Hecarim and he absolutely monkeys out and destroys his health bar in a trade with you because he misclicks a ton and takes a ton of minion damage as well as your damage in return. He's still got a corrupting potion as his starting item, so he can sustain up a little bit and get to the point where he can afford to walk in and take some damage from you because he'll heal off his W anyways, and he won't die instantly because now he has enough health to actually survive whatever you can throw at him. Now you know Hecarim has all this, but the story doesn't end there. he also has the ability to avoid ganks and avoid a lot of your damage. Why? Because of his E. Hecarim E ramps up to 85% bonus movement speed. Unless you have a bunch of hard CC when you're facing him between both you and your jungler that's coming to gank him, he can escape basically any gank. And it also doubles as a CC tool for him and even more mobility than you might be expecting because of how he can run through people, knock them back, and travel further than you might be expecting once he actually runs over his target. And as if all that wasn't enough, he still has his R, which allows him to become unstoppable for as long as he wants to, up until a cap of course, the travel distance of his R, and it also has even more CC. All these tools combine to make Hecarim Top a really good pick, and even before his buff, he was a really good pick. That's why Riot is nerfing him back down a bit. They weren't really paying attention to Hecarim Top because he wasn't all that common, but that doesn't mean that he isn't strong. With all that in mind about what Hecarim can do, let's point out other champions in League who can also do this in the top lane right now. You have champions like Fiora who have good sustain, the ability to nullify damage, mobility, even the ability to CC people back, even though you have to time that pretty well. Gragas is another great example who's just now starting to get some popularity. He's got CC in his E, he's got CC in his R, he has sustain built in on a percentage max health basis from his passive, and his E is also doing double the work because not only does it have CC, but it's also his mobility tool. Shen has a dash on his E, shielding on his passive, regen through his Doran shield, and his second wind. He's also one of the few champions who has the ability to block something that normally is completely unavoidable. Basic attacks. That alone turns him into one of the best champions for surviving certain tower dives. And the most underrated example would be Zac Top, because people are still playing Zac Top with Conqueror and finding that it's actually really strong. If you don't believe me, then I mean, hey, just go check any stat website. Look at the past couple patches. Look at who's getting more popular. For the first time in a long time, Hecarim actually is picked enough that he shows up for most stat websites. Same thing goes for Shen and Fiora. These are two champions who have gotten a rise in popularity as they become more important to the meta, and there's a reason for that. I'm not recommending you guys try out a strategy just because I think it's good. It actually is good, you can see it. And with the changes that are happening on the patch, it's not going to suddenly completely reverse the polarity and make it obsolete and completely useless. So seriously, try out these champions if you don't already. And if you do, what have you guys been feeling over the course of the couple patches where these champions have become strong? Have you noticed that they become a lot more popular? Do you notice that they get banned a lot? Do they feel stronger? Let me know in the comments. The last thing I'm going to leave you guys with is a jungle related strategy, kind of like the one we talked about in top lane. It has a lot to do with what you're picking and also what you're banning in the jungle as a whole. Right now, it should be no surprise that junglers with fast clears are really good. I mean, we've been talking about this for a long time. Ever since Riot did the change to the jungle experience, it's a big deal to actually clear as many of your camps as possible. The experience changes to assists also really impacted that as well. So you should know that scaling is really important in the jungle, but the other thing that you need to know that is really important is just how incredibly important it is to have big team fighting presence. And you can see this just like with the top lane, where all you have to do is look at the champions that are really performing well right now. Hecarim, Zac, Nunu, Fiddlesticks, Evelynn, Karthus, Kayn, all of these champions are fantastic examples of champions who do well in team fights, and usually for different reasons too. This is a really great thing for jungle diversity as a whole. Hecarim's engages with his E, his R, and Righteous Glory are absolutely fantastic and a really good example of some of the technically best soft engage that you could possibly get, to the point where it's basically hard engage. Evelynn loves when people try to do stuff like team fighting and walking around in the jungle because she can pick them off really effectively, especially when they try and form up a normal formation that she could flank behind. Nunu brings it back to the other camp with Hecarim, where you kinda just roll your way at people and they can't do much about it. Fiddlesticks, I mean, do I even need to describe what this champion does? Everybody knows that the Crow Storm is super impactful in any team fight, and getting one can literally turn around a fight 1v5. All the champions that I just dove into a little bit do the exact same thing. They warp the way that a team fight is fought in their favor. Hecarim and Nunu force people to position a certain way, where they're just asking the enemy tanks to step up and block them to try and protect their carries, but at the same time, that puts them at risk. Evelynn is the opposite, where she wants people to form up the way that Hecarim and Nunu do, but she's asking for them to try and engage on her team. That way the enemy carries and the enemy backline are suddenly no longer able to be saved. Fiddlesticks asks for the same thing that Evelynn does, but handles it in a different way, where he wants the enemy team to come into a position that he's prepared to dive on top of, so that he can get a massive fear off and insane ultimate damage across multiple members of the enemy team. And it's really clear that these champions are the ones who are shining in the jungle, so you need to jump on the train and start to really understand why they're strong and pick either them or champions that are like them to truly take advantage of the strategy that's the most effective right now. The last thing that you should take advantage of is our website, where we have tons of guides that are all made by challenger level players. Seriously guys, it's a no-brainer. If you're looking to improve, you gotta go there. We have tons and tons of guides on just about any topic. The videos up there get to go super in-depth, unlike what we can do here, and we're always releasing new content for you guys to take a look at and learn from. And anyways, as always, my name is Ace Windstorm, and I will see you all later.